No, Tim is in Kansas City, and John is working. Okay, have you, oh yeah, Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You know, you've got your minutes emailed or sent earlier, and do we have any comments, corrections, or additions to the minutes? If not, do we have a motion to accept the minutes?
I make a motion to accept the minutes as written.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, those wishing to address the Airport Advisory Commission need not request permission in advance. Action taken as a result of public comments will be limited to directing staff to study the matter or rescheduling the matter for consideration and decision at a later time pursuant to ARS 38-431 et al. Okay, we can start with the Business Park staff report.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Commissioners, Vice Mayor. You can hear me? All right.
Is your light on?
A little bit. No light.
I don't have a light. All right, so I just have a few updates. Shock Center demo. We have a piece of property out there at the industrial park that is made up of 3 separate parcels. On the majority part of that parcel, there's what would be the old Shock Center. We're in the process of demoing portions of that, and that will start commencing on the 17th. We sent an email out to the industrial park today on that, February 17th. We're going to take down 2 trailers to start. There's a double wide and a single wide, and those will be demoed. The 3 roads repaving grant and project out on the industrial side, which was basically 0.23 miles on government road, 0.35 miles on transport road, and also we'll have a certain portion of Portway from Flight Line all the way down to Olympic. That grant was for $275,000. Just as a reminder, we're in the engineering phase. Plans are currently 15% complete on that. We'll be at 30% in our next meeting at the middle of this month. Additional roads out at the industrial park. We've got 5 other roads that we're working on getting submitted to the county to be taken into their maintenance system. That'll be on the next county, or the March agenda. I believe it's the 15th agenda at the Board of Supervisors meeting. And so that will put pretty much the remaining roads out there, other than these 3 roads that I'm working on, into the county maintenance system. And then every road out there would be in that system at that point that is currently constructed and finished. Land sales. Last month we completed land sale to Interstate Group. Their manufacturing plant out at the airport. They're looking to expand and continue to offer the services they do, but do it a little bit different. They're at their new their new property. They're going to be. They purchased a building at 5005 North Olympic Drive. The city had the property right behind it that it's going to be able to expand their building back into, and so that sale was completed.
Are they moving the whole thing over there?
No.
Oh.
No, just expanding. They need more space. I've got a website update, but I can wait and hold off on that till under old business. Since Tim's not here, I'll do that there if that's fine. Okay. The other thing in regards to rail, just kind of go over the update from the the whole year as a whole with regards to cars. This last 2019, we totaled 1,775 cars. 2018, we had 1,591 cars. So this year's that's an increase of about 184 more cars. Kind of the breakdown here, some of the biggest users in the park, Plastics Express had 505 of those cars come into the park. Musket Corporation, 256. Cantex, 376. And so they kind of break down a little bit smaller from there. Potter's Industry, about 83. We had a company called United Energy Trading that we did a transloading agreement with. They did 178 cars this year. That was a new agreement that we got into. The total cars stored went down a little bit from 2018. We went from 4,579 cars stored to 4,499. Not a big difference in that, and so that's the update on kind of who's, the amount of rail in the park. I did notice rail was on the agenda a little later, so
Will you be here for that?
I'll be here for that. So with that, that's an update. Unless there's any questions that you guys have.
What does the airport get for each of those cars, or how is it done?
So our revenue is 4% of. We get 4% of their revenue, and we get paid every 3 months.
Do you have an idea what it is for the year?
I do. This year we're at $23,402.
$23,000?
$23,402.
So far.
I'm sorry. That's from 1/25/2019 to 12/17/2019. So that's 2019 numbers. So you can kind of plan on those numbers going into 2020.
Any other questions?
So it's 4% of the rail operating budget is what we get.
Obviously, land that is accessible by rail is more valuable than land that is not. Do you know how much, do you have some idea of the increased value for land that is accessible by rail at this point?
We haven't we have not done an appraisal on rail-served property yet. But in the past, when you looked at the numbers, it was around 15% more.
That's all?
Yeah, that's what I believe. I could get you more specifics on looking at, I'd have to find an appraisal that was done about the same time, two properties being sold a few years back.
So about 15% more value?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just wanted to get this kind of on the record about the shock center.
Sure.
I had toured that building and the main building and realized it would make an excellent shot house, which is what they use for training for law enforcement, military, and all that for indoor stuff. And I had mentioned it to the deputy chief, and he was very interested in it. But I'd mentioned it to so many people that I forgot if his interest was as training or that he was interested in all the old artwork that I took pictures of. Anyways,
Who was that you spoke with?
The deputy chief,
Deputy
Rusty
Chief.
Cooper.
So originally when we looked at putting that building and doing demo, we went over and we took pictures of that and we sent it off to the sheriff and I asked Rusty, who would I speak with? And so they actually came out and they did kind of a tour of the whole thing again and reminisced and took their pictures, and some of the guys that were part of that program are still with the sheriff's department and the various departments. So they were able to come out and take a look at it. And then we also worked with Rusty. They had a little training that came up, and
Okay.
so they went out there and did some of that. So,
Well, that may have been done after I talked to him, so
yeah,
I just want to make sure, and
yeah.
probably
There's really no interest in keeping it though. They didn't say,
Right, I
hey, we
see.
want to keep this, and then we'd have to look at, well,
what's it worth?
what's it worth, and is it I think it's probably more of a liability, and so the
Right.
closer we get to having bare land there, it's going to be more of an asset to us.
Right, okay. Very good. Thank you.
What about the block wall? Are you gonna keep that?
Not that I'm aware of.
So that's gonna come down with the building?
Oh, the block wall, no, we're just gonna, I would say we'd leave that. That's something that I don't think will stop a buyer from purchasing the property,
Yeah, they may.
so
wanna
I wouldn't want to
incorporate it.
spend that money right now.
Any other questions?
And we're not, we still have a ways to go on that. There's two units going down, and we're gonna put in our, the plans are to move forward with the other ones as we process through, so.
And what is iCall doing with their building?
What's that, I'm sorry?
iCall the employment agency, or?
Oh, yeah, that was another sale that we did, month before last.
Do you know what they're doing with it?
So they're gonna use that as as part of their business, with their employees. They have, I think, over 200 employees that they have out there between the different businesses, and so they can host, events there, barbecues. They can also, work directly with the employees, so they don't have to go all the way downtown. They can come right over there. It's really gonna be
So it'll be kind of some offices and an
yeah,
event
a
center.
facility.
Tom
Yeah.
mentioned he thought he'd use it for events, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden there's footings that thought they were putting a big building up. They put in some nice landscaping. So
Landscape.
yeah,
Made it look real nice. And that's what we called out on the when we sold it, what they were gonna be doing with the property.
and any prospective land sales.
There's projects, but I've got no offers. So, but there's projects out there looking.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
Steve, you're up.
Good afternoon, everybody. All right, so I'll run through this. Again, I apologize that I've not revised this yet. I'll be sitting down with Tina and try to get something that's a little easier to read, that gives more information in regards to the financials on this. Based aircraft, again, still at 96. Storage aircraft, 164. We continue to lose some of those. You'll note the fuel numbers. And then revenues year to date, roughly 840,000. This last month, January, 93,000. When you look at the prior year, it's in the right trend. Expenses to date, 495,000. I'm rounding these either up or down. Expenses this January, last month, 66,500, and encumbrances to date this year, 100,000. FAA, the overlay grant, which is a supplemental, per a phone call last week, we'll have surveyors, we think, late February. Core samples the same time. Surveyors will be here in the day. The core samples we'll do at night, and we'll probably close the airport. I've talked to one of our helicopter operators. It won't be an issue for them. And again, we'll note them that, and once I have a definitive time, I will put something out that everybody can see, and probably post something over at the terminal as well. FAA, per a conference that I did not attend roughly 2 weeks ago, dropped a bomb, and basically both supplemental grants and regular grants from this time forward must be executed by May 18th, or those dollars go into abeyance. Think this has something to do with the upcoming election. Don't know that for a fact. What's been the timeline the last few years, I'd say the last 5 or 6, is typically FAA would execute grants in August to September. So this is basically bumping things up by 4.5 months. Per our consultant, we're in pretty good stead on this. There are a whole mess of airports where they're SOL. And so they're not going to have grants this coming year because they can't make that timeline. So that's a new development that none of us planned on, and even the airport district offices did not have any idea this was coming. It was a surprise to them as well. So this is coming out of FAA headquarters in DC.
I have a question on that.
Certainly.
What does that mean must be executed by May 18th?
It basically means that we will have to have gone to bid, have the appropriate bid number from whoever the contractor is. That'll have to go through review by our consultant, us. It'll have to go to the FAA for their review. We will have to have packaged something and taken it to the city council prior to this, because there won't be time. So they'll send us a grant after council's approved, and then they'll send us the paperwork. That paperwork has to be signed and back to them by the 18th.
Does that include the FAA's review of the project?
That would include it, yes.
So that has to be completed before?
Correct.
Okay, and that FAA review, is that before or after council action?
It depends on which review. In this project, there will be 30 times that staff goes to the FAA for their concurrence. So the latest thing was last week there was a 30% engineering design review. I'm assuming that has gone to the FAA and that is going to be approved. I'm assuming that sometime this week or next there'll be 100% engineering design review, and that'll be approved by the FAA. But in this case, yes, the FAA will have to have seen the grant, what the consultant came up with in regards to comparisons, and they will have to have said okay. And again, when I take this to city council, because the timelines, if we were to do this in a linear fashion, the timelines would be impossible to meet.
Right.
So in other words, when it goes to council, there'll be a packet of things, and there'll be language that we put in it. If everything
If this occurs,
makes the
that will
case,
happen. Yeah.
then we go with it.
All right.
If anything bollocks, then we have problems.
All right, thank you.
How many bidders are we looking at? I mean, this has got to, with the narrow time frame, it's got to put pressure on some of them. Is that a problem, or are they pretty much? Because
I'm
they're got to
not-
be apprised of what we're going to be designing ahead of time to give them some.
Well, and that'll be part of the process. There'll be plans and specs, and the specs will be about this thick. My gut tells me that the people who bid on this, and typically bid on most airport projects, do this all the time. It would be like Granite Construction and some of the other big folks. This shouldn't be an issue for them. Typically, it's not the small folks who have never done an airport project. It's the ones that have done this stuff habitually. So I don't anticipate an issue.
'Cause
I've
last
heard
time
no
we did have
signals.
some locals bid on stuff, so
Yeah.
that's what I was wondering. Okay.
Which projects are these? I mean, is this for Taxiway Bravo? Is this for the resurface?
This is the resurface on the runway, which is 2.5 million with our match.
And it's resurfacing only 2, 1, and 3, or are you resurfacing?
3, 2, 1, just
3, 2,
that
1?
runway, yeah.
Okay.
And again, as we get further into this, I'll be meeting with tenants and we'll be talking about closures and all that. We're not there yet. ADOT, the 180,000 from them for the taxiway Bravo design. I need to do up a report, get it to city council for their approval, and then we're off and running on that. And then working with FAA and ADOT in regards to a new environmental project review that's new. The master plan continues. We figure that the last meeting will probably be late April, early May. And I'm going to go a little off topic here. I think you all know this because I've bitched and moaned about it, and not in a negative way. But in my 33 years of doing airports, and from everything I've heard from people who were doing airports prior to me, this situation that we're living through here at Kingman is really, really, really unusual. And that being the dynamic of this recent acceleration on the runway project. And again, all of this will happen in relatively a short period of time as airports go. This is going to be 3 years or less. But we're doing a master plan for $500,000. We have and again, this next project is not a grant. We have an 1,800-acre land release project. That in total will be about 240 out of our pocket, no grants for that. A business park master plan for said same property, that's 175,000. And again, this is all going to be working sort of at the same time. The runway overlay, which is 2.5 million, that's a grant. The industrial roads that Bennett was talking about, that's 4.2, that's 425,000. Brava design, which is ADOT, 200,000. A drainage study for after July 1st, so next fiscal year, 200,000. That's another grant. Brava construction, the first phase, 1.3 million. So that's only half of that, or a little less, of that taxiway. So when you add all those numbers up, well, and then you have the Dross project, which is 30 million. When you add up everything but the Dross, that's $5 million in less than 3 years for a general aviation airport. That does not happen. If it was San Jose, if it was San Francisco, if it was Oakland, if it was Phoenix, Tucson, okay. They have projects stacked on a bookcase and engineering staff. That's normal for them. It's not normal for us. And so we're in a very nice position. If we perform on these grants, then FAA, their confidence will be up in us and they will give us more money. But the key being that you go and look at Havasu, they're talking about 380,000. They're not talking about these kind of numbers. This is mind-blowing. So enough of my little thing there. The Dross site coring's complete.
Excuse me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I had a question on the last section. The ADOT grant for Taxiway Bravo, you said you're completing a report for city approval. When will that go to council?
My goal is sometime this week, and this has been my goal for the last 3 weeks, is to get that draft done so that it can go to council hopefully, I believe, the 15th of February. Not the 15th. It'll probably be the meeting after that. So probably the first meeting in March is the goal. The 3rd.
March 3rd.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. So Dross site, the coring's complete. We got a copy of the draft report. What we've been told is, because it's Department of Justice, it's going to go to, there's going to be some back and forth here, some table tennis. So negotiations will start to begin on that. I've scheduled a meeting with, in regards to construction management, because when they were doing the corings, they found that the construction management, the last time they did this, was substandard, and that's being that's putting a nice tinge to it. So again, we'll get together with some engineers and legal folks out of Phoenix, probably in late February, to go through some of that. We're nowhere near that yet, but I figured, no, let's get in front of it and have it sorted out. We've purchased 3 vehicle and 1 base station airband radios. The base station is in our operations area. It's made a great difference. We don't have to dance around on the floor. And yeah, exactly. It works and works very well. And again, we're taking some of these old radios that were, again, iffy in our vehicles and getting rid of those. I continue to research the aircraft storage industry and am asking definitive questions of why do you locate in certain places? And that sort of thing. And so I'm reaching out, not waiting for those people to come to me.
Steve,
Yes.
what's the major answers that you're getting on those questions?
Well, again, it's just a beginning. They like to go places where there are structures. If you go to Roswell, all the structures that are there, ex-Air Force, and it's interesting, no new hangars, nothing has been built there. Except a blimp hangar that imploded. Beyond that, there's been no new structures. The sense I get, I haven't had any luck with Victorville yet, but when you go by the airport, again, the premise there and at Mojave, these large structures that people are utilizing. So that's a piece of it. Although one of the people who's using the airport, Frontiera Flight Holdings, they just bring people up, they do stuff on the ramp, and a week later, the airplane goes out. So it's a nice to have. I think there's a lot working for us, but again, from a marketing standpoint of this very targeted industry, I don't know that a lot of people understand yet that it's a new game here, and that we're willing to do parking and things of that nature. And I'll mention a little bit of that, a little more of this as I go through the report, because there have been some people who have contacted me. I think one of the things that Goodyear has that we don't is an MRO, a large FBO, that has connections to the aircraft dismantling, that also has connections to, I think it's a 2-year college. So they use these kids who have certifications to pull these airplanes apart. They pay them a very low wage. And then as far as cutting up the airplanes, anybody with a I was going to say bandsaw, wrong tool, but anybody with the tooling can basically just chop an airplane up. But there's a tie to education, which I think, I don't, because I've not looked into the education aspect of it, but that might be something that would be a possibility here too. But again, I've done no research on that. I'm just looking at the dynamic at Goodyear, which seems to be a really interesting approach. Using kids so you don't have to pay fair market value wage and bring people in that are going to demand that. I've not heard any negatives so far. I mean, we don't have the Roswell dynamic to where you're out in the hinterlands and who wants to live in Roswell and all that dynamic. So, and we're close to Vegas. So I think we have a lot going for us, but that's the reason I keep reaching out and getting more information.
Thank you.
Yes, certainly. And Bennett and I are, I'm going to be reaching out to the FAA unofficially and talking to them about cost breakouts in regards to aviation and non-aviation costs. In other words, costs for the industrial park, what we can and what we can't do. At least the history I've found so far, the little bit of it is dated. There doesn't appear to be anything in writing on our side. So it's a matter of, I don't want us to get into, since I lived through it in Arlington, Washington, a revenue diversion audit, which I believe Tehachapi has currently been sucked into that morass. And again, it's not that we're in any kind of danger, but it's just a matter of let's set this stuff up, let's do it right, which again goes back to the whole dynamic of if they're going to give you grants, they want to give grants to a place that understands the dynamics and moves forward on that. We're, again, in the process of developing a policy to pursue non-payments. We are now going around the ramp for the first time that I'm aware of and noting N numbers and where airplanes are parked. And it's amazing what we're finding. In fact, I had a bank call me Friday, and one of these airplanes, which appears like it was in a hangar because it's got that fine coat of dust all over it, the bank wants to repossess the airplane. So I'm trying to get some read, since we don't have a tie-down agreement for said airplane, how long it's been here so I can ask for tie-down payment from the bank. And then we have some abandoned airplanes, of which I can think of 2 right off the top. We have a DC-8 that supposedly is working through Cassie, but Cassie doesn't know it, so they're just parked out there. So I've got the owner to that I'll be contacting and saying, oh, by the way, you've been here 2 months, pay up. But it's just this administrative stuff you don't think about as being all that important. The airport CIP for this coming year is drafted. That'll be coming back to you all at the next meeting. We're in the process of outfitting the pilot's lounge. And again, apologize it's been taking so long, but we're trying to get some new retro-looking furniture that can go in there at a relatively low cost, which is easier said than done. We're also working on the terminal fencing project, which will incorporate landscaping. The fencing piece of it, we appear to be moving on that. But again, a lot of details, which you wouldn't think about. But
Like eradicating gophers.
yeah, and there is a city employee who is the gopher murderer, so we figure we'll bring him out to take care of some of the gophers. Gate combination changes, we'll be scheduling that, have not gotten to it yet. The airport stormwater plan, site visits have been ongoing. A number of FBOs have been visited. We're going to have training this week, so that's going to be Thursday and Friday. And again, the premise right now is that our aviation tenants who are on the flight line will dovetail under our permit. Now, mind you that depending on the amount of acreage you have, I think, Cassie, the cost for them is going to be $500 to ADQ, not to us. For smaller entities, it'll be about $325. But that sure beats doing a stormwater permit, because this is costing us about 15 grand. So it definitely is worth their while to go down this road. The 15 kV regulator that we have out there that hasn't, taxiway Delta hasn't worked in about a year. Thanks to Paul on our staff, he's done some research and found that we can replace the control panel for that for about $3,000 versus what I thought it was going to cost for a new regulator and all that, which was $16,000. So major cost savings. I believe we're in the process of basically ordering that, and he's going to install it. So that's a big plus.
And what is that used for? That the lighting?
The regulator basically operates the lights for taxiway Delta. So if you've been out there at night, you'll notice that those lights haven't been on for over a year. So the goal is to get those back up. Our ARF vehicle, it is no longer ours. It has been surplused. The fire department basically had some professionals look at it. To repair it would have been $130,000, plus a lot of the parts are no longer made. So it is going to go out for auction, and it is going away. Fire response will be via the city or NACFed, since they're sort of under the same management, whatever the closest station is. And I'll be working with them to get them some basic training in regards to don't park the rig in the middle of the runway when you respond to a gear-up landing, because if somebody needs to land, they're going to pass right through the rig. So a little bit of strategy, where the traffic patterns, and again, I and my staff are to back them up with airband radios, and should somebody declare an emergency or they're going to land, we basically get people off. The equipment we can replace, the people we can't. So
Are they gonna base anything
at the airport?
at the airport?
No. Not
Oh,
at this
man,
time.
by the time they get there, it's over, man, because they had to gear up, caught fire. You had to be there fast.
Yeah.
It was one of Chebley's. Unless they base something there, that's not gonna do us any good at all. We need something, even that little truck where you could go up and put something on it. Yeah, that just is not gonna work on my end of it.
It's only somebody there a third of the time. It just, very few airports have any permanent.
I don't
base
care.
down.
We had a big rig set up. We had 2 rigs. Now we're down to 0. And they got to drive from out of town. I mean, that just, we'll talk about this one. This one's going on the schedule later. That's not, in my book, good.
Yeah, but Chevrolet's gone.
We've had one incident in 15 years.
So
Apparently it wasn't worth fixing, even if they got their immediate.
So there is a base agreement for aircraft storage that we've developed. I was talking about Frontiera. They come in, and about once every 2 months, a CRJ gets retrofitted, ferry flight down to Mexico. Fillmore Group, I need to do up an agreement for them. They want to scrap 2 CRJs. Ameriflight is going to park 10 Metroliners on the ramp, at least initially. And that agreement's done and out, so those airplanes should be showing up here in a week or 2, or some of them anyway. Researching an airport poster idea. We've been contacted by the 99s, a women pilots group. They are interested in starting their national air race at Kingman in 2022. That's probably about 300 or 400 visitors to the community over a 4 to 5 day time frame. I'll have to contact the folks at Havasu. I don't remember what the what amount of money they dropped. I want to say it was about 200,000 into the local community when they were on site back in 2012. Plus the positive press it gets us. Been contacted by the Wyatt Aerospace Group. They're out of Chandler about the possibility of parking some CRJs on site. I will be hopefully meeting up with them here in 2 or 3 weeks, give them a tour of the airport. Met with the ACRP folks. They're through National Sciences, they're consultants, and they do booklets on different aspects of airport management for communities that don't have a clue of how to run their airport. This booklet they're working up has to do with the transfer from one governmental oversight group to another. I think they were looking at 13 different airports. All the rest of the airports basically were going to authorities. We're the only one that was going away from an authority. So it's a little guidance book sort of thing. I've been interviewed regarding airport profile for the Arizona Airport Managers newsletter, so hopefully that'll be coming out. And then the Cama mixer we had at the airport roughly about now, a month ago, it was successful. As far as hangar occupancy, pretty much the same old as you see here in the report. No new changes. And then leasing and development update. We're following up with city engineering in regards to trying to find a past survey for the 5 acres north of Leonard's. Security update, roughly last week, right off the nose of the A300 DHL, which is right off of where the military used to take the B-17s to sight the guns. We had a strand of 3 strands of barbed wire that were cut. Those probably by now have been repaired, and you could see where somebody basically came over the fence. So we're in the process of fixing that. Security folks were advised about that this weekend, so their patrols went out in that area, which they normally don't, but just said, yeah, keep your eyes open. Again, they didn't get back to me, so I think we're good there. We continue to work forward on the 1,800-acre land release. Hope to meet with them maybe this week or next, and you'll note some more trees will start to disappear magically. So that's, any questions? Yes, sir.
Just back up one sentence there. Since ours is a municipality, we have the right to go to government auctions and stuff like that, right? And get stuff for practically nothing?
I would say, from my standpoint, as an ex-IRS employee and conflict of interest, the appearance of a conflict of interest in my world means it's a conflict of interest. You wouldn't catch me at something like that where it's the city of Kingman. If it was the city of Lake Havasu, yes. But from my standpoint, there's no way that I would go down that road. But did I answer your question, or am I going too far afield here?
I think he's talking about going to military surplus and other auctions
Oh,
as a buyer to get equipment.
yes. I believe that if we do the paperwork, we could do that.
Well, I would suggest that if it's possibility to keep an eye out for night vision equipment and stuff, or FLIR equipment especially, for the security of the airport, because that'll show you every rabbit, gopher, let alone the people, around the airport. So.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea.
Would we be taking the revenue from the auction fire truck and then possibly go to a federal auction and reinvest in a fire truck that would be functional?
I've not asked what the value of the truck that we're getting rid of is. I can speak to having talked to some folks at Havasu, because they're getting rid of their ARF rig as well.
What's wrong with the one we've got? I know everybody said it's not in good working order.
I did not get into that level of detail. I am trusting the fire department. I gather there's a pump within inside this thing that's somehow encased in the truck in some area where it would have to, I mean, you have to take the whole truck apart to replace this thing. There are parts that are no longer made, so they would have to actually fabricate parts from scratch. And so just from the standpoint of, and I believe the rig is like 25 years old to begin with, so it's just not cost effective to try to keep it up. The other thing about military auctions, typically, not always, but typically the stuff that the military gets rid of, the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, it's been road hardened and put away wet. Typically, and the old Heister forklift that we had that was out in the dump, that was from the Air Force, I think at Nellis. And by the time we got it, the steering was just shot, and you couldn't find parts. And so that's another thing that's being auctioned off. And the old yellow dump truck that we had, where the brakes didn't work, where you couldn't get parts for the brakes, it is also going to auction. So a lot of times, if you're really cagey, sometimes you can make the military auctions work, but a lot of times what you get is
Junk.
junk. Yeah.
On the truck, where was that being maintained before?
The
Fire truck?
You know, I don't know. I don't know in the past. Actually, I do know, now that I think about it. In the past, I believe City Public Works had somebody who worked on fire trucks. I believe he retired about the time I came on board. And so I think that they're now having to outsource, or maybe this guy is actually working on as a private contractor on some of the city fire rigs, but I've really not paid attention.
So even when we had it, they were maintaining it, or did we maintain it or something?
My crew out there typically did a lot of the light stuff.
How
And
long
if
did
it was
we-
heavy, then it went to Public Works. That's probably before my time. I'd have to do some research on that.
How long did we?
Came from Fort Lauderdale, and I think we paid $300,000 or $400,000
Oh,
for it. When was it? About 10 years ago, 8 years ago?
Okay, Mojave Utility on Airway maintained it. Thank you.
so I'm sorry, who was that?
Mojave Utility on Airway
Oh, yeah,
maintained it in the past.
okay, thank you.
I actually have a question for our liaison. On the EA for the 1,800 acres, does that count, Jen, I gave her a cutout of putting a new terminal over there, and there's acreage involved in that. Are you aware of that, that's the spot for a terminal is on the south side? Does that ring a bell or anything?
During the microphone, I'll speak as loud as I can. I don't have
I heard him.
Yeah.
just for the record, I don't have the information to answer that question right now, but I can get back to the commission.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you.
I have a couple of comments. Answer to yours, Scott. I discussed that with the master plan planners, and they had that on there before. They intended to put it on this. Met with ACRP consultants. I was in on that meeting, and it was very interesting. You're two very sharp people working for the FAA, trying to provide information that'll help to airports. And we were the only one that went from an airport authority to city. The others were going the other way. So they were that's why they found us. Okay, what happened here? Why did we not go the other way or fix the problem, whatever it was? So it was about a 2-hour meeting, and they will put all of the information together, compile it with advisory circuit.
All right, I was just going to give you a quick update on the website. Right now, I'll give you kind of what we've done, what we're in progress of doing right now, and then the next steps after that. So we've completed the development, the initial development of the site, the layout, the look, all of that's been done. The various proposed site map revisions have been done. So we looked at what the initial site map of the website, and then we did some revisions to that based upon our conversations, and those revisions have been completed. We've also purchased the domain name for the website, which is going to be kingmanairport.com. In progress right now, the staging of the website is happening today, and they say staging, it's back-end stuff. I don't really know what that means, but after the staging is completed, then they'll start the content migration, which will happen this week. They'll start putting in the content that is going to be on the website. That's going to entail, all of the pages that are within the website, and pictures, all the data that might be on there. And then the next steps, after the migration is completed, they're going to have a go-live date. Right now, we're looking at the end of March, early April is what they told me just today in regards to going live with the site. We don't want to go live unless, there's always going to be stuff when you go live with the website that you're going to find. You're going to go back in and you're going to make some corrections and stuff. I'm still changing the economic development site, almost 8 months later. So, but we're getting close. Very excited, and hopefully we'll be able to, see that real soon. So, any questions? Scott?
Not really on the website.
Okay.
On
Well, then, who? No.
trying to bring in high-speed internet into the pilot's lounge or the area. Have we had any luck with that one? That was my one question about the pilot's lounge, because that's critical for the guys to be able to get data.
Absolutely.
Because they're going to be on weather, they're going to be FAA filing new flight plans are different and everything else. So
And I believe we've made some progress on that. I'll let Steve.
Yeah, if I may, actually, it's interesting you bring that up, because the last 2 days we've been dealing with that. We've gotten an estimate. If we were to run cable to do this, it would be like 10 to 12 grand. But it looks like it's a simple fix, and that is we basically just work an agreement with the cafe. We double the price, and that is to say we would participate, so we would pay half, and boom, it looks like we're there. And again, I'm not a technocrat in that area, but everything I'm hearing is, nope, just up the service and you're there. So it should be a simple fix.
good.
Thank you. I got no comments from anybody on the commissioners, on the master plan. Steve and I worked on it, and he came up with one, and
You said master plan. Do you mean mission statement?
mission statement.
Okay.
Sorry. I've seen it all night. So these are not in your packet. The one that's in the packet is the one Steve gave to. Here's the one that.
If I may, you'll note in the stapled packet, which had the report on top, look at the back part of that, and I word processed what Carl had and added in the objectives, and below that, the council priorities. So find your report, and at the bottom of that, you'll see 2 pages. That's sort of a mix of Carl's and my work.
Right. We have the top piece is kind of an intro, and then the last piece is information from the objectives of the city citizens and the national and the council, and then we have a bunch of objectives that we had never looked at before. And I think what is in that packet is Yes, Steve put those together, and I added some stuff, and I think just at the day, we'll come back with, please give us more information on objectives, what else we should have on here. So that part we'll put together at the next meeting, and then hopefully we can put all 4 parts together and we've got a finished package to go to council.
Take one and pass it, please. Give me 2. Yeah, send these this way. I did a little research, and I apologize, I didn't understand that you wanted those sent to you. I've been involved in mission statements for governmental agencies in my prior life, and what I've always understood is a mission statement should be clear and concise, and then you add value statements. Did you get one? Should be enough. And then you can add on to that with your vision or value statement, which is coming pretty close to what you folks have, you and Steve have come up with here. So I have 4 examples, random, no specific order to them, that gives us some idea of format, not so much content. We are currently developing a good list of content, but I would like to see us try to format it in a mission and vision statement, or a mission and value statement format. And I would be glad to take, Mr. Chairperson, the list that you have provided us, that you had worked on with Steve, gives us a lot of good information. Now I do. Yes. Yes, so.
I regard that as the compilation of Steve's and mine.
Okay.
To me, number 1 had to be to provide an excellent facility for National Aviation Transportation System, because our money comes from the FAA. That's their objective.
Okay.
And Steve put that as an objective. So it's something you have to consider either way as a marching order. But how we put it is maybe somewhat important. And I think my sense here is that we need to take this whole package and give it to the city council and say, is this what you want us to do? And if there's something that's wrong or left out or should be deleted, then let us know, and now we've got our marching orders. Now, council can change, I guess, but until they come up in different orders, this is what we should follow.
Right. And I believe we need to come up with what we believe is a finished package and submit to them.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
What I do like is, I believe this is from you, statements, in our mission statements, we need to state that we support city council's priorities. However, we do not need to list or reiterate each of their priorities.
Yes.
So I like that.
That's from Steve.
Okay.
And the identified priorities, which are,
Yeah.
I mean, we could send that along to the council. That just confirms that we're on the same page, I think, unless we got them wrong at that. Most of this came out of a weekend workshop with the city manager based on everything the city council and questionnaires out to the community.
I understand that. So with this new information, this new list of priorities and that you've provided us with, I'd like to take a shot at forming it, putting it in a form that more mimics a typical mission and value statement, and bring it to this.
Wonderful,
body.
and feel free to work with Steve or I.
Yep.
Or anybody else. I mean, this is got to be the whole commission on board with this.
One question I have, and I did see it in here someplace, but perhaps not from our list, is, are we making a mission statement for the commission or for the airport? I mean, we're going to have to answer that question before we come up with a final.
It has to be for the commission, in our, because we're the creature of the council. But for us to advise on what the airport priorities and so on, which goes to staff, I mean, indirectly, it goes from us to the council and the city manager to Gary and down to the airport man, even though we deal pretty much, eye to eye all the time. So it's, but I think it has to be for the commission, and that's a point Steve raised, and wait a minute, we can't, I don't think we can do it that way. I think that has to come through city staff too, if it's gonna be for the airport manager himself. What we need to put together is for the commission.
Okay, all right.
Do you see that the same way? Okay. Okay. Gary confirms, so we're on the same page there.
And council member, do you have a comment on that? On whether a mission statement should be a mission statement for the commission, the airport commission, or a mission statement for the airport?
Thank you for the question. I think when you look at a 7-member city council, which is always changing, the reason that the city council uses commissions for various historic preservation, economic development, airport, planning and zoning, is because 7 people can't be in one place at all one time. So we really want to make sure that you guys, as far as our airport commission, that we are working all hand in hand, but you guys are the ones that are going to roll up your sleeves and do all the recommendations with staff and really work towards making our airport the best that it can be. So it has to be for the commission. This is what our commission is going to do in support of making our community airport the best that it can be, in support of the city of Kingman's goals.
Perfect. That answers the question. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll move to table this until next meeting.
Second.
Do we have a second? Second? Scott? Any discussion on that issue? All in second?
You need a second?
We got one. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. January, where did my agenda go?
Shade hangers.
It's here somewhere. Okay, shade hangers. This has been an ongoing question, and I think this is just too much for Steve to do on top of all of the rest of the stuff that he's got to do. There's no question, this has got to be a secondary thing. So, I jumped on it, and I got a hold of, Hap, where's my stuff? There he is. Hap Hollander with Agribill. And you guys have a copy of that. Now, this can be changed, and the size doesn't change the price very much, unless you change it a lot. But the one he gave me a price on is 40-foot wide, and that has some vertical sides to it, so it's not just a half circle. And at 50 long, you got two tails, 25. You can go length on the airplane 25, and a lot of them are much shorter than that, and 16 high, which should be enough for an that size. If it was 50 wide, we'd need higher. Now, this company came from Dave Amspoker, and this worked out very good on price. I think you guys got it's in the packet, and there's a ground piece that's shown on there. There's 2 methods of construction: footing, which is not necessary, but it can be done that way, and that's an awful lot of these buildings are used in the agriculture field, so they put in a footing because they don't put anything but dirt in the middle. It can be done with a total slab. Because the wind loading on this is so minimal, And that's the reason the government built it. It really proved itself during World War II. There's just virtually no uplift from the wind on it, so it doesn't take much to hold it down. You can buy a little tin shed from Home Depot, and you don't have to get too big, and it'll blow over. So this can be put on, and the sheet that's in there actually shows a base plate with a lip, like it was going over a concrete. They will either not bend that lip or cut it off. I'm not sure which, but you could use concrete anchors or asphalt anchors, which are a similar kind of an expansion bolt, and they're relatively inexpensive, every 2 feet. So we could probably get some Henrys, put it on the backside of the steel, lay it down, and on a snap line, and put that plate down. And it's an erector set type of construction. You got to torque the bolts, that's all, but that's just a minor thing, having a torque wrench. He gave me a Mandays construction. You got to have a scissors lift or a little crane or something to lift it up. The total comes out to less than $100,000 without electrical. One of the problems that we discussed last meeting was that, well, we need to have a restroom within reasonable distance. You just can't, have them using peas, cans, and a hanger. So power is desirable. Where on the airport can we go? And all the places that we looked at, the infrastructure is just not there for that without spending a lot of money. We do have a restroom close enough. I have been unable so far to get with Kennedy, who has the hangar right next to the dumpster. But if you're familiar with the dumpster, there's an electrical box right near the corner of his hangar. There's an inch and a half, or I don't think it's 2 inch. I think it's an inch and a half PVC electrical conduit that runs from his hangar to bracket hangers. So however that is fed, that could be redone, and we would have at least a raceway. We just have to pull wire in it, worst case, all the way to bracket hangers. And if these things are put out there, then we'd only have to trench through that asphalt from those hangar buildings to these and put something in. And rather than trying to develop all of that at this point, I wanted to bring it in here and, lay this out. I have not yet put it out. I spent some time on the phone Friday with the master planners on what are the numbers as far as the setbacks for buildings and slope and all that from a taxiway, because that's where that is. And, well, lo and behold, he gave me the AC number and the classification of the runway, which is what I didn't know to get that information. So I can dig that up, and I know we could put buildings closer than we are. That wasn't the decision. We need enough space to bring, I think, airplanes parallel to the taxiway, so we don't have to be just on the taxiway. So there's a little bit more to do, but from the budget number that I believe is 200,000 you put in, Steve?
Last year it was actually, I think it was 250, something in that range.
So we should have plenty of money, even with power, to build the shade hangers for those 10 if we go with this type of construction. Now later this week I should have a single building for 10 back-to-back, very similar to what we have. Interestingly, he said 40 between columns is not a good number. It's, it's because of the steel sizes and cost doesn't work out so well, but he knows what we've got to do, and we'll come up with something. And that's with steel erectors. So they work with virtually all of the steel building companies. We're probably not going to do much better than what he's going to give me as a budget number. So we can, I want you to know where the progress is. I think we've got a number in the budget to cover what we want to do. We've got to decide on the layout and where exactly, which we should have at least some possibilities at the next meeting. And at that point, I think we could take a position on what we're asking or recommending to the city staff to do.
is it possible, I think we could also go with solar for generating the minimal amount of electricity that we're gonna wanna need in those shade
I
hangers.
totally,
So I don't know that we'd need to even look at trenching across the taxiway.
that, it may be that that's the cheapest way to go.
Yeah.
And we need to, I think we should get numbers from both ways. I give you a number on the electrical, I have to give a number on the trenching.
Yeah.
But it's not something that has to be done at the same time. We don't have it now. And we probably should upgrade what we have, with the same amount of electricity with the new ones. It looks different, but the military has put a lot of these in for their fighter planes. A lot of them are taxi-throughs, and, you know, that works well for them, but the key thing is the wind isn't gonna bother them. And for this, you've got more sun protection because you only have one open side, or essentially the front, or the back, depending on which way you put your airplane. Any more input?
Well, I'm going to renew my objection to a Quonset-style hangar. I believe that we're moving in the wrong direction for developing a modern, attractive airport. I believe with the $250 budget that is currently submitted in the CIP, that we can get the shade hangars similar to what is there, however, 5 feet deeper, because ours are a little shallow, for good protection.
I used your numbers for his estimate.
And without the electrical and other amenities we want to add, we will be able to construct that within the budget that's currently in the CIP. So from my perspective, I think this is a good fallback plan. However, I don't think we need an exact plan until we have a budget. Once we know we have it in the CIP, then we can get the exact estimates, which we'll have to have fresh estimates anyway. And then we can quickly decide as a commission which direction we want to go with the Quonset hut style or the typical shade hanger style. That's my comment.
I agree with you. As far as the visual preference, I'm not so sure. If I were the guy with the airplane in the hangar, I would prefer the open as opposed to the Quonset hut. If we could put them on the back 40 someplace, I would feel even much better about it. And that may be something to plan for in the future. If we could put them due north and south, we've solved a whole bunch of problems with all the weather issues. So if we could put a budget number together that would work for either one, then we can put it out to users. Here's our projected rental amount. Who wants to sign up for this or who wants to sign up for that? So if that's a motion.
I don't believe it's a motion. If it was a motion, it would be to continue working on these ideas and continue to refine them and be prepared in June, once we find out what the CIP has reserved for us.
Just a question, what size airplane would that 40-foot opening eliminate, say in a high wing? Will that accept King Airs?
No.
Oh, no. No, King Air wouldn't even take a 50-foot wide.
Okay.
No, Barons are 42.
Oh, my gosh.
So you're
It's
eliminating
single
310s
engine.
Barons, so you're down to singles. Mine with my ART wing extensions is 39.6, so man, and I don't know what the curve is going up, and that's something I want to check
I
on.
think you would be all right, but that's a good reason to go. And there's another thing too. You put 2 RVs in there. If you go a little bit bigger, you could tail one and nose the other one, and you got 2 in 1. So, you know, if they want to partner up, of course, the same thing with a hangar. You could put 3 of them in a good-sized hangar. What's the market? That's a good question.
The executive hangars, a number of them have 2 aircraft in them,
Yes.
so.
I did a study back in Van Nuys and process of possibly building a hangar, and if I remember correctly, that the square footage of an airplane versus the square footage of hangar, you could almost put twice as many airplanes in square footage inside the hangar because of the overlap.
That is probably true.
I think if we were to do something like the agri-built, we'd be better off to go with a little wider. We'd be able to accommodate more aircraft, even if we were at 45 feet.
Steve, do you have a book that lists all of the aircraft and their size and data?
I can get my hands on, I have one, but it's dated. I can get my hands on one.
Like
Aircraft
they haven't
design.
built much new since '78. So.
Yeah, it should be good. It should be good.
Yeah, it'll list constellations and DC-6s and such, but no, I can get a copy.
We won't have a Pilatus in there, I don't think.
The other thing is, if the city council and city staff are looking at budget numbers, this is clearly a less financially burdensome way to go with the agri-built, as opposed to, and last time we submitted for what we thought would accomplish the problem, solve the problem, because we've had people on the waiting list for years.
Well, that'll pay off in 8.5 years.
This will pay off.
Without electrical.
Yeah, without electrical, and maybe 10 years if we went with some electrical.
Yeah, and that's just to pay it down. If you get a loan, you got a probably 15-year loan with interest at most. So, and that's, I don't know if that's feasible with the city. It was with the airport authority. They borrowed money from the bank for the last hangars they built. If we have, one of the things I learned is that the city has to finance all of the capital investment until it's completed. Then the grant money comes in. They approve the grant, but they don't give you the money till it's done. So I don't know where the money comes from. That's a cash flow issue, and it's almost an apology. You know, we've talked about financial statements and getting better information, more detailed than what we get here. So I did the obvious, something I should have done a long time ago. I sent Tina a letter and said, can we get an income statement and a balance sheet on the airport quarterly and cash flow statements? And she said, well, of course you can get an income and balance sheet, not cash flow. We do that at the end of the year. So that's more complicated because of the way the city and government does it. I don't know that impact yet. I'm going to get with her and try and understand how that actually works. And so that whatever number we have, we can start the year and add, subtract, so we kind of know where we are. But we are going to get statements. Isn't that amazing?
I think that's great, personally. Maybe it's time to have Tina come back and educate us on these things.
She'll be here anyway next month.
Okay.
So we'll add that to it.
So anyway, if cost is the concern of the city staff, we can present 2 different ways to go. I personally think the agri-built provides more protection for the aircrafts. I agree they don't look quite as nice as the shade we looked at earlier, but
it does look like World War II.
it does look like World War II.
Yeah, you just have to paint it.
Which
Yeah, we're gonna
trying to
paint
do.
it green.
Yeah, we could paint them green and everything, yeah.
I don't know, that gets galvanized.
That would
and
make
I'm
Scott
not
happy
sure.
because he likes the color green here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, we had this, you.
My
you
motion,
moved, you
my
seconded.
motion died due to the lack of a second, but I'll renew.
No, he seconded, right?
No, he did not.
Oh.
I'll renew it. I move that we table this and continue to work on it and bring it back at next meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No. Okay,
I'm sorry, excuse me. Before you get started on new business, maybe you could officially recognize Travis as our incoming liaison, at the same time thank Jamie for her good work in the past.
absolutely.
I think that's
And-
great.
And she's here today. And yes, she is going to run for council again, if you hadn't heard that. And it certainly has done an awful lot to help the airport along. And Travis has done so much for the city, I'm sure we can squeeze a little bit out of him for the airport. Okay, new business, railroad. I've been here 15 years, and when I got here, Santa Fe ran the switching engine to put the cars at where they go in the industrial park. When there was a problem with the track, the airport authority got the bill, and sometimes it was very expensive. There was a flooded out section and a derailment, and so that it was not a good situation. Well, sometime, I don't remember how long ago it was, but it was probably 4 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe more. The KAA signed a contract with the Patriot Rail to, they have, as I understand it, I haven't read it, a license to operate the switch engines and a maintenance contract where they have an obligation to maintain the tracks. The city still owns the land, and they own the tracks. And the more I thought about this, I'm rather certain the city manager probably has no idea, and risk management has probably never looked at it. And is it an asset for the airport? It's still on airport released land. It pays, according to Bennett, now $20,000 a year in car percentages. There's no no source of money for the industrial park to provide any kind of maintenance, and this would include weed right away from the property line to the street that is not paved all the way to the property line. So I wanted to do a couple of things. One, request that the city take a look at this from a city management standpoint and decide, what, from their perspective, what they need to do. And for us to look at it from the standpoint of, is it reasonable and fair to give any income off of that track to the industrial park, that they could form an entity that can do stuff for the industrial park, change signs in maintenance, that sort of thing. Does the airport really want to have anything to do with that? In other words, can we deed it from the airport real estate to the city real estate? It's kind of like the county doing it to itself, I know, but Steve mentioned he's talking to the FAA about where you draw this fine line for these kinds of things. And if we can get information out of them that finds a solution here, I think we should try and go down some road. I have no idea what that road is, but I don't think it's a good situation right now. I don't know if the city has any liability policy on it. I don't know what the limits Patriot Rail has. Once upon a time, we had a very, very bad car explosion here. Can that happen again? I have no idea. But it crosses streets, and, we put, I think the airport has done it, put the blinking signs up there. Is that always gonna work? It almost never does. Somebody decides to take on a train and they always lose, and then they sue.
If they survive.
Huh?
If they survive.
No, but there's a relative.
Maybe it should be the railroad that purchases it.
The railroad didn't want it. I think they probably could have got it. But the military insisted, as I understand it, that all the tracks were theirs. And during the war, they kind of ran the railroads. They had control over it. So, if there's any comments, and any ideas at this point, any things that we should look into?
Yeah, if, from a liability standpoint, if Patriot Rail has a lease agreement with,
They have a license,
they have a license.
not a lease. That's what I'm told.
Well, the airport owns the property the rails are on,
That's, well, yeah,
Correct.
the city is the owner of the airport, yes.
and the city is the owner of the airport. There should be some agreement as to them carrying some sort of liability limits.
Oh, I
And,
s-
and I think it would be a real good idea to know what those limits are, and if they're not, low and high enough, we should be encouraging them to raise those limits, if it's possible.
no, do you know, Bennett, did Patriot Rail sell it to somebody else? I know it's for sale. They have a number of other similar railroad systems that they operate.
What I was talking with Gary about is anything that you guys would like us to go over in regard to the liabilities and the limits and things, we can look over that as staff and come back with you on that. In regards to the sale of Patriot, any entity that would have bought it, those agreements would transfer with that purchase.
Sure, they're there until they, it expires. And I think at least the city ought to look at where they want it to be when it expires. And, we get 4% of everything on their cars. What about storage?
Yeah, 4% of all revenues in the industrial park.
I think we ought to get a higher percentage on storage. And Bennett was talking about adding some more rail line out there for storage. Now, it's interesting that, I went by today, I couldn't believe how many tanker cars were out there in front of Muscat. I don't know if I can't believe all those tanks would be filled up and overfilled if they were all full. But when we had the last recession, if you drove around the country or flew over it, every piece of rail that wasn't an active track had storage cars on it. They were everywhere. We're 10 years into expansion. What happens when we have the next recession? That's going to be a big income generator.
Sure.
And Patriot Rail they're not going to spend money for track, are they, for storage? Has that been proposed?
That's what we would look for them to do.
That is in a
Yes.
proposal, okay.
That's what we'd look for them to do, and it'd be a negotiation that we'd have to enter into on how that would be paid back.
So if I'm thinking on this, right now we've got released land in an industrial park that was formerly part of the airport that's released. The question is, does the city who owns all the land out there run a railroad or administer a railroad, or does the airport? And my thing is, the airport is aviation and it should not be related to the railroad. Somehow that has to be transferred to the city, has their own little railroad if they want to handle it that way or pursue another way of going about it. But when you look at liability and different things, it should not be unreleased land just sitting there still kind of titled. And the city lawyers will probably give you a better definition of how they view it And they're the ones that are gonna have to come up with, along with the insurance end of the city, to look at where they're at and what they wanna do. So I say it's in their hands and that they'll look at it, is the way I look at it.
Well, you're right, the city does own it, the airport, never, the airport authority had a lease, but the city's always actually owned it. So it was released land. To my knowledge, the city has never, nor did anybody else ever buy that land. Land by itself that narrow isn't worth very much, but the rails might be worth something. I don't have any idea. To me, it's just a loose end, and from the airport perspective, I agree with Scott. I would love to just have it gone, but I would love for some money that comes into that to go to the industrial park for maintenance. And that was how this whole thing got started, and Steve said, well, I'll look and see what the FAA will go for. And this can't be the first time this has happened, because it was all done in the same way in World War II. The tracks were owned by the military. But I just don't think it should be the way it is. It ought to, without everybody knowing fully what's going on. And there's a definition as to who gets what.
Well, I have a question / comment. So airport revenues on the aviation side are to stay within aviation use, correct? And this is directed at Steve.
That is correct.
Okay, so if there was an accident that had liability associated with those sidetracks, the railroad that we're talking about, would that liability come against the airport?
The airport is not a separate entity.
Oh,
It's
hold
owned
on.
by the city.
And I'm not an insurance agent, so I don't have a sense of that, nor have I looked at anything connected to the airport or the rail. I mean, that's a question at this point I have no answer for.
Okay, and so that brings me to my next question is that industrial park assets or is it airport assets?
And I would say that prior to this meeting, we met with Tina, and we were going through, just from a fiscal standpoint, and having had the great opportunity to work for an airport that got caught at revenue diversion years ago. And no, I didn't cause it. I happened to work there. That was one of the things, in essence, we were talking about was up to this point, because this is so new to us, we haven't gotten into that level of detail that we're now talking about, and this is just from a budgeting standpoint. I'm not even getting into the whole liability piece. And that's one of the things in this coming budget this year where we were discussing dividing off, estimating things for the industrial park, things for the airport, both in a revenue and expense standpoint. But again, we've not, and then part of this ties back to my off-the-record conversations with FAA in regards to, okay, being reasonable, how would you look at this? So that doesn't really answer your question, but just adds more information.
It really does. It tells us we don't know. Okay, fair enough.
Well,
So I think that the commission is concerned with the liability exposure and where that would fall. And I think it's a very real concern. If it was to fall on the airport side, that could potentially end our airport. And so I think we should request city council to direct staff to figure that out and to come up with a definitive answer sooner than later. Because we cannot, and I think this is kind of where Scott was going, is we can't advise the city council on possible actions or how we should handle it until we know whose responsibility it is.
that's absolutely true. Now, I can tell you this. The property was transferred to the county and the county to the city with a as-is, where-is clause in it. the land was released within that industrial park from the restrictions other than height and no subdivisions and things like that, with a provision that the land sale money has to go to the airport. Now, it doesn't say gross or net, but I think anybody with any common sense would say whatever you have to spend to sell it, including a real estate broker or, put in, clear the weeds, whatever it is, that could come out of it, and it goes to the airport, and that's the end of it as far as the FAA is concerned. Well, in this whole thing is this little ribbon of track running around, and it wasn't covered. So that's the long and the short of it as far as is the legal contract between the city and the War Assets Administration is taken over now by FAA and or GSA. And since the FAA claims to have the authority to release all of that, and this is very common sense kind of issue here that doesn't provide $23,000 is not a lot of money when you're looking at a potential liability that could be significant, that I would think the FAA would jump on the right to release it. And then what does the city do with it? Well, I would be inclined to form a limited liability company to own and operate the track and contract it out with people like Patriot Rail. Not really operate it, but, through a license. So at least it isn't going to pull down the city's credit with it. But, I'm not one of those high-powered New York lawyers that put this stuff together, but I know the tools they use.
But that brings me to my point. We can't advise our city
you're right.
council because we don't know who's in charge of it.
No.
So the only way we can help our city council members is for us to find that information out. Well, we individually or as a commission cannot find it out. City staff has to do that, and probably working with Steve and the city attorney is how that would get resolved. So I would make a motion that we send a request to the city council to direct staff to find out who's ultimately responsible and liable for those ribbons of track we're talking about.
And how should it be handled?
Well, and then send it back to us, and if we know it's city or industrial park or airport, then we can make a plan to propose to the city council members, and they can take whatever action they deem necessary.
I agree.
And I think whoever is responsible, whoever's operating on the tracks should have a hold harmless agreement against the city, airport, industrial park, whatever,
Well, contracts like,
That's a legal detail the
yeah,
city will.
contracts like that, and we
Yeah.
leave that up to our city attorneys to
But
make
as
sure
far,
that's covered.
essentially, all we're saying is, hey, folks, we've been out here for a couple of years, and what we found is there's a can of worms that we don't know much about, and we'd sure like you to dig into it, so,
Okay, so I have a motion
yeah.
pending, a second?
Second.
Any more discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Did you get enough to just call it a motion? Okay. Thank you very much. Feel a little guilty we didn't do this earlier, but the thought never really dug in that, hey, this is a loose end that we really need to fix.
How many total years of being an airport commissioner do you have? And in that vast amount of time, would you be able to have all the answers? I sure wouldn't.
No, but Steve, do you have any sense on those questions, when the FAA might have some comment, or do you think this is going to go to Washington and sit there for a while?
Well, number one, we don't particularly want to make this official and go through channels because you're painting the FAA into a box where they're going to have to say yes or no. We do not want to position them that way.
Sure.
So my approach is going to be to talk to a couple staffers offline.
Yeah.
This is unusual enough, and as you were all talking, and you were talking about the liability, it seems to me this, and it's not like I want to keep spending all this money that you guys want to build a shade port with, but I'm thinking that it might not be a bad idea to talk to some legal professional that does aviation stuff that might be into the weeds on some of this, to get an idea how FAA is liable to officially respond, should we ask them. Again, the premise here is not to go down that road, but just as a double check to, because again, we don't want to paint them into a box where they're going to say, no, we want them to work with us and position them to where they will work with us.
Well, I would hope the city attorney doesn't have the resources or, you know, the time to dig into it in depth, that he's got Plan B to go to some outside firm.
Well, and that's the, and again, we've had this discussion in regards to not having somebody on retainer, because that's kind of costly, but having somebody on some of these really minuscule, detailed questions that has a sense where the FAA is liable to go, that we can talk to, who's not part of the FAA, who has a history with them, and can give us some guidance legally.
One of my questions would be, I mean, there have to be other airports within the U.S. I'm just wondering if, like the Airport Managers Association, if you put a queue out with them to see who else possibly has this. I mean, I've landed at other airports and they have rail there, not being used, not utilized, so they were there, they were part of the transfer. So there have to be some that they're still utilized, and I wonder if through the Airport Managers Association or something where you could just do kind of a follow-up, and if anyone would respond, I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there, but yeah, we'd have to find out kind of what's being done right now, and maybe nothing. I mean, in this again, we may not get an answer.
All right, user group status. I was at the last user group meeting, and, you know, we try not to have enough commissioners there so we have a quorum. I think we had 2 people who were not part of the commission, or might have been an EAA member, and there was a real estate investor who just wants to keep up abreast of what's going on because he has property nearby, and an individual who'd like his lease re-examined. And that was it. And, you know, the notice went out to the whole user group on a blanket email. And the time before that, the question came up to the group that was there, which was quite a bit bigger, maybe 15 people. You know, this has been going on every month since Joe started it. And that punch list has got awful small. You know, there's things like shade hangers that are in process, but they know this isn't something that's going to get announced next week. And Steve made, hey, well, what do you think of this? Should we change it to a quarterly? And it isn't like somebody thinks we should not disseminate information, but he's got lots to do, and I can't see any good reason to sit there for 3 people that have a personal agenda that they could meet with him personally on, because it just doesn't seem like we have anybody out there that has a real issue that they think needs attention right now. And so he asked me, can you bring this up the commission rather than him being the dictator? And I think that's our job. So let's any comments on that?
I move that we go to a quarterly users meeting.
I think we could even go to a third of a year or whatever. I mean, the biggest thing is to utilize now the upcoming website should be able to disseminate information, have stuff on there, and even 3 times a year, you may end up twice or whatever in actuality. But if there's a reply mechanism on the website that can be utilized to take up some of this, I think that would be the way to go in my book.
Was that a second?
What are your feelings on it, Steve? And I should ask you too, Bennett, because the website is more your bailiwick.
I don't have an issue with quarterly or 3 times a year. I mean, one of the reasons, as I understand it, for the users group, was just a lot of dissatisfaction and a lot of things that hadn't gotten done. And we seem to have addressed that. I think a lot of the complaints to the city council, to staff, have gone away. So the idea of 3 times a year, and again, if we're talking about the runway project, there'll be a closure, I'm guessing, for probably a week, maybe 2. Again, that's going to go out to everybody. They're all going to have an idea that's coming, probably at least a month out, maybe a month and a half. I mean, that's part of the dynamic here is communications. But from my standpoint, no, a quarterly or even 3 times a year or even twice a year seems good to me.
I'll second the motion if it's still fresh. And I have a comment.
You, second, yeah, it's still
Okay.
fresh.
All right, thank you.
Discussion on the motion.
My question is the user group meeting a branch of this commission?
No, it isn't at all.
Then why are we involved in deciding how often it meets?
Well, he's asking our recommendation.
Got it.
For him as an
Good
airport
enough.
manager.
Good enough for me.
And that's,
Yep.
and we came out of the user group.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think there's a connection, but,
It's good enough.
it's a
It tells
two
me
different-
how we got involved.
okay. So we have a motion on the floor. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, so we got passed on that one. Does anyone have any announcements?
I think the sound system at the recent CAMA meeting was outstanding.
Well, you can say a little bit more.
I second it.
Yeah, that was awful nice of Mr. Burrows to do that. And he should have got recognized. That was good. That was very good. There's things that were on the report from Steve that are really kind of events that are upcoming that can happen here. And, at this point, it's an idea, and once it solidifies, that's gonna go on the website, and it'll be disseminated to everybody. So there is quite a bit less for the user group to really, unless they wanna help, volunteer and do things on an event, which they, certainly the Midium or EAA people, but now the next Airfest will be another group of people. Many of the same people, but I think the website will help an awful lot, and we'll have not so many disgruntled people or people saying, gee, I wish you'd do this, because Steve has added an awful lot to the list that no one ever mentioned that still needed to be done. Anything else? Announcements for the good of the meeting? Okay, meeting's adjourned.
Didn't we have some stuff with students or college or something like that?
There's stuff being done.